Hello and welcome to the Miraculous Lightworkers channel, your go-to place for all things about lightworkers and enlightenment. I'm your host, Wendy. Today we are talking about the book Russell Brand wrote about recovery, freedom from our addictions. This is applicable to all forms of addictions. And last time we covered the beginning. This is essentially a way to approach the 12 steps in a much more humorable way, I will say, than most 12-step meetings. The reason I'm doing this is because there are so many people out there that light workers are helping to heal, and even many light workers that don't know that they're light workers who are afflicted with addictions. Addictions are one of the most universal things that anybody can be affronted with, essentially, in their life, afflicted with. And it applies to things you wouldn't even think it is. People sometimes are just addicted to mental constructs. Even if they say, well, I'm not addicted to drugs, they'll say, but I'm addicted to codependent behaviors. I'm addicted to shopping. I'm addicted to pornography. I'm addicted to chocolate. Like there's all these like little addictions, but there's still these odd vices that left unchecked can cause a lot of damage in people's life. That's what it comes down to. So the reason why I chose to cover this really is because of the amount of people that I've seen suffer with addiction in my own life, and myself included, because like I said, a lot of people want to pretend that they're not addicted to something because they think that they will be judged so harshly that they hide it. Most people are busy trying to hide an addiction due to shaming and whatnot. So I think that this is a really safe space for people to come, because a lot of people won't go to a 12-step meeting because they don't want to be seen in that arena, number one. They won't even comment publicly on a post like for a video like this because it feels too like they're outing themselves, and people don't want to do that. They hide behind these pretty facades where, well, I'm not that kind of a person. Almost everybody in their own way silently suffers with something. So I feel like I'm being called on right now because of the history I've had to share this with you. So the format we're going to run with this is I'm going to do a chapter at a time. I will read through, and at the end, I will give you a bit of a commentary on personal experiences and how I think that's relatable, so that we can kind of work through this together. We can do this in a really anonymous way, because that's essentially what any 12-step program is that it's based on anonymity, which means I'm not going to go out there and give my name, my, reputation to the world so that I can deal with my inner stuff. It's all inner stuff. Okay, so we're going to go through chapter 1 today. And in the original 12 steps, step 1 is we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. A lot of people don't want to admit that their lives have become unmanageable. A lot of people don't even want to take responsibility for the damage that they've created in their lives and in other people's lives because of what their addictions have caused. So, and most people don't want to admit that they're powerless. So this is really a step of humility, okay? Saying, I don't like the way that particular thing feels, and I don't want to be at the mercy of it. I don't want to be considering myself somebody who is either a victim or victimizing anybody else with my addiction, this thing that has come out of control. So I will share a little bit also from A Course in Miracles, because I think this is a really interesting avenue to go when it comes to addiction. But before we dive into chapter 1, when we say we are powerless over our addiction, what's happening here is that our ego has run amok, essentially. In the Course, they'll tell you you need to value the power of your mind. Your mind is incredibly powerful. It's just that it's unrestrained and you've let it get out of hand, and you have used your mind to create in a way that is damaging. You're powerful. So you really can get a hold of these things. Okay? Your life will become unmanageable if you let your ego control you. That's just point in fact for everybody in life all the time. It's a universal truth. Okay. So, chapter 1. I love Russell Brand. He's so funny. He's very witty. So the way that he writes makes this a lot more fun. That's why I decided we're going to do it like this, because there's a lot of resources you can get for any 12-step program. A lot of it's super duper serious stuff. But the way that he writes and speaks is just, it makes it so that you can sort of break up the painful seriousness that comes with a lot of addictions with some humor. That's why I chose this. So again, step 1, we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. This is an invitation to change. This is complicated only in that most of us are quite divided. Usually part of us wants to change a negative and punishing behavior, whereas another part wants to hold on to it. For me, recovery is a journey from a lack of awareness to awareness. Let me tell you what I mean, using my own vanilla experience as a bog standard drug addict and alcoholic. I always felt I was rather too clever for something like a program for living. Certainly one that had any religious overtones. It's not that I thought that religion was the opiate of the masses. If it was, I would have had some. I loved opium. It's that I thought it was dumb. Drab, dry, dumb, shouty, hysterical, dumb. Small town dumb. Foreign dumb, take Christianity. Either it's so medieval and swathed in pageantry that it's droning and ridiculous, or they try and modernize it and make it cheesy. Bad guitars, jumpers, and knowing, sympathetic looks. No, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and interject very briefly. I do come from a Christian standpoint, so what he's saying here is not my particular bent on it, but because of where he was coming from, he didn't want anything to do with it, because he had a sort of a visceral reaction to anything that had Christianity on the, sort of outset of it, because 12-step programs are very much about leaning into your higher power and stopping trying to do everything of your own volition, leaning into your own wisdom, etc. Okay. I had 2 serendipitous licks. 1, I was introduced to the 12 steps by a seriously committed atheist. And 2, I was privately desperate. I was broken. I'd run out of ideas and juice and was only kept moving by inertia. I'd given up thinking about why I felt sad or different or hopeless. I just knew I did. And I left that knowledge parked to one side in my mind, unaddressed, ignored, rotting. Meanwhile, I drank and used drugs to keep me upright and functioning, to stop the sadness running over. If you'd ever tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Russell, what's your plan?" I may have reflexively spouted some cockeyed optimism about waiting for my break. Or this time next year I will be a somebody. But deep down I knew I had no plan. I'll ask you now, do you have a plan? You don't have to answer me now. In fact, there's very little point in answering me at all, given that I'm not there. You're now alone reading this. But can you, in what ought to be the sanctuary of your mind, say to yourself, I have a plan. I know where I'm going. My way of coping with the quiet anxiety of uncertainty was to find distractions and pleasures. I was never still. I was seldom reflective. I sustained myself with distraction. Here is a clinically accepted breakdown of the cycle of addiction. If this model is reflective of the aspect of your life that you'd like to change, it's likely that a 12-step model will too. Let's see. A 5-point guide to the cycle of addiction. Number 1, pain. Number 2, using an addictive agent like alcohol, food, sex, work, dependent relationships to soothe and distract. Number 3, temporary anesthesia or distraction, aka any substance. Number 4, consequences. Number 5, shame and guilt, leading to pain or low self-esteem. And off we go again. I'll tell you how this applies to me, and you can mentally keep track with its application to your problem. And don't let yourself off the hook if I seem crazier than you. That's my qualification for writing this book. Remember? I was in pain. As long as I can remember, I didn't feel good enough. Now I'm a little older, I think. What does that mean, good enough? Compared to what? When? Where? How? But back then, in my gurgling and nervous childhood and rash and frenetic teens, I just felt inadequate, incomplete, not good enough, and it hurt. I looked out at the world as if from within an aquarium, and it felt lonely. I also had no technique for addressing that feeling, so I had to invent some. That is number 2 on the 5-point guide. I used an addictive agent, and in my earliest incarnation of addictive behavior, I used the innocuous toxin sugar, chocolate, food. I put stuff in my mouth and I felt better. What's wrong with that? Forgive me if I'm patronizing you here. I want you to understand a few crucial points. I was managing my feelings through external means, and the object is not in itself bad. There's no point in demonizing chocolate biscuits. They of themselves are not the problem. They won't, of their own volition, kick down your front door, shine a flashlight in your face as you sleep, drag you from your bed, and jam themselves down your throat. The participation of your consciousness is a prerequisite. For some people, a chocolate biscuit is a harmless treat. For some, a wee drop of rum or saucy nip of a smack is a tonic. The heroin will ferry you to crisis more quickly than a chocolate penguin biscuit, but the key point is the function of this external agent in your life. Number 3 is a temporary numbing. The moment of grateful exhalation and relief, post-biscuit, post-coital, post-gratifying text from the object of your obsession, post whatever it is you're fixing on. Point 4 is consequences. What is the price paid? I used to feel awful as a kid after I'd snaffled my way through a week's worth of biscuits in one absent-minded sitting. I don't think there's a person alive who doesn't reproach themselves momentarily after an orgasm achieved in solitude. And after using drugs, when I was coming to the end of my sojourn into substance misuse, was the only time I could countenance quitting. Number 5 is pain, and we're back to the start of the cycle. As Eckhart Tolle says, addiction starts with pain and ends with pain. Here we can see that dissected. As the cycle of addiction goes round, it gathers momentum like an out-of-control carousel, like the spinning of my nauseous head when drunk. The legal age to drink in the UK is 18. By the time I was 19, medical professionals and the teachers at my college had identified I had a problem and were telling me I needed help. In retrospect, it was evident much earlier in the way I ate, related to people, thought about myself and my sexuality, I wish I could have identified these patterns, this tendency sooner, so I could have begun to apply the methods outlined in this book. For me, though, things had to get worse. I had to repeat this pattern for 10 years, with consequences increasing with each vertiginous whip. I didn't know there was another way. I was a kid, then I was an addict, and by the time the idea of working a program had reached me, which with substances means abstinence and with behavior and food means structure, I was 27, a heroin addict, and in serious trouble. Step 1 invites us to admit that we're using some external thing, a relationship, a drug, or a behavior, as the power that makes our life livable. It asks if this technique is making our life difficult. By admitting we are powerless over whatever it is, we are saying we need a new power, that this current source of power is more trouble than it's worth. I have made this admission many times, and I make it still each day. It began with the admission that I was powerless over drugs and alcohol. They were the most obvious and troublesome power sources that I was using. The unmanageability here meant the negative consequences in my life were stacking up. And importantly, once I start with drink and drugs, I don't know when or if I will stop. The very act of drinking or using sets me on a course that I'm unable to reliably arrest. It is admittedly more subtle when applied to pornography and overeating, but it is still clear that I have to structure my thinking around these behaviors, and that the structure can't be based on compulsive behavior. To return to my point about two minds, a divided self, my experience of that was as follows. When I first heard about the program and the idea of abstinence was explained, I thought both F that and a kind of low resonant thud of acceptance that abstinence would be my path. One of the many paradoxes of the spiritual life I encountered here lies in the trite maxim, one day at a time. As in, just try not to drink today. Try not to eat unhealthily today. Try not to act out sexually today. I knew they meant you can't ever drink again. No more chocolate, ever. And you are now celibate. Your ballroom days are over, baby. And they do mean that. If you're a serious alcoholic, you cannot drink. If you have food issues, you will always need structure around eating. We have to accept it. Where the one day at a time homespun thanks, Nan, wisdom kicks in, is with the rather zen and incontrovertible truth that life is experienced in the present. Beyond today, your projections of life are conceptual. You don't have to not drink for 20 years today. You don't have to give up white bread for all eternity right now. And if you do make it through today and wake up tomorrow, what does it really matter that you didn't act out yesterday? I mean, you're not accumulating tokens for punitive pleasure. This one day at a time cliche, when taken plainly, is no less profound than any be in the moment Eastern wisdom I've since encountered. Today is all I have. Now that I'm 14 and a half years clean, one day at a time, I like to riff on this concept like I'm Charlie Parker on Foucault. When I feel like I want to act out sexually, I surrender it. I don't act out. Then the next day, or even an hour later, I think, imagine I had done that. It would be over now anyway, and I'd have detonated my family. Step 1 means you can change. It means surveying the landscape of your life, your family relationships, your working life, your sexual behavior, your eating, your use of your phone, drugs and alcohol, the way you spend money, and asking, am I happy with this? Is this how I want to live? If there's a behavior or problem that lurches out garishly, some glaringly obvious looming catastrophe that this surveillance reveals, then it is here that you can take step 1. I am powerless over this, and my life has become unmanageable. This unmanageability concept is interesting too. And as well as the more obvious interpretation of chaos and disorder, there's a deeper, scarier meaning. The first aspect in my case was plainly observable: unpaid debts, hospital visits, jobs lost, relationships lost, friends holding up their hands and reversing out of my life. I was creating chaos. I'd followed another well-known 12-step trope. First, my using was fun, then fun with problems, then just problems. The positive aspects of my character were becoming redundant. It didn't matter that I was bright or kind or talented. These traits were being diluted to the point of irrelevance by the seeping negativity of my addiction. The unmanageability, though, has a disturbing, and in my case, demonstrable clause. When I yield control to that part of myself, when I drink or use or say F it around any destructive behavior, I don't know when I'll get my life back or what state it will be in when I do. The unmanageability at its heart means that there is a beast in me. It is in me still. I live in negotiation with a shadow side that has to be respected. There's a wound. I believe that this is more than a characteristic of addiction. I think it is a part of being human to carry a wound, a flaw, and again, paradoxically, it is only by accepting it that we can progress. I took step 1 when I admitted I was powerless over my addiction and that my life had become unmanageable. That I didn't have control, no matter what I said to myself and others, and that it was getting worse. I knew there was no way out, that I had fear and shame that I didn't want to face, that I hoped I would never have to, that I would be able, through my will, to bend the world into making me feel all right somehow. When I met Chip Summers, bloody ridiculous name, I know, who ran the treatment center where I got clean, he was the first 12-step person I spoke to. He never mentioned God or higher power. As I say, he's hardcore atheist. He makes Richard Dawkins look like Uri Geller. He just told me straight, you are effed. If you carry on using like you are, in 6 months' time you'll be in prison, a lunatic asylum, or a grave. And whilst I was a little shocked, I knew he was right. You might not be addicted to crack and heroin, as I was, and the above might seem comfortingly alien, so I should tell you, I've since worked step 1 many times. With food, I am powerless over food. If I start eating chocolate, I don't know when I'll stop. With sex, if I make sex the panacea, the salve to this pain we discussed earlier, I will soon lose control of my sexual conduct and I'll end up in more pain. Or work, or my relationship. In fact, I now work this program and therefore this step in a 360-degree fashion. I have no power at all over people, places, and things. And if I ever for a moment mistakenly believe that places and things, that I do, and act as if I do, pain is on its way. If there is something in your life that is causing you a problem and you're aware of it, I bet you've tried using will, crystals, hypnotism, and pills to placate it. My suspicion is they haven't worked, and my experience is they never will. Oddly, counterintuitively, in our culture of individualism and self-centered valor, it is by surrendering that we begin to succeed. It is by admitting that we have no power, that we can begin the process of accessing all the power we will ever need. I've heard it said that we have the ism before we have the addiction. I now attest to the presence of a confligatory condition that awaits the substance to ignite it. Now, with 14 and a half years drug and alcohol free, I cannot clearly say whether it was in sex or drugs that my addiction found its truest expression. Certainly, drugs and alcohol have the power to decimate your life with greater efficiency, but my escalation through so-called recreational drugs to hard drugs was underscored by a uniform pain. Many of the associated problems that addiction evokes are caused by their criminal status and poverty. What doesn't change, regardless of the manner in which addiction is materialized or the economic conditions of the afflicted, is the presence of pain. Pain is a signal. It's some aspect of us that's beyond our somewhat narrow conception of self-communicating. A pain in the leg means don't put pressure on this leg. A pain in the mind means change the way you live. With earlier manifestations of the same condition, the signals were not easy to read. The impulse that made me eat too much chocolate when I was a kid was the same impulse that led me to heroin addiction in a child-friendly, socially acceptable disguise. Or when I was watching too much TV. Even then, as a little boy, I was using external resources to medicate because I felt uneasy inside. My personal circumstances may have contributed to this. My mom was ill a lot, and I had a tense relationship with my stepdad. But these biographical details are less important than the sense I had that something was missing. When I was a kid, knelt in front of the TV in the post-school, pre-mum home hinterland, I believed I had a solution to the problem of being with me with every penguin biscuit I jammed into my gawping trap. The distraction of the taste, the ritual of unpeeling them like a Buffalo Bill victim, the scraping of the chalk-brown custard guts, enough to occupy me, to fill me up. So the treat of a perfectly enjoyable chocolate biscuit sandwich wrapped in foil became an emotional necessity, a survival tool. Alone at home, they toppled like a row of calorific dominoes into the hungry void. I already had a sense of shame and solitude around this behavior. There was already something other than the simple eating of biscuits at play. When through the storm of puberty I graduated to porn in those charming sepia stuck-together pages of yesteryear, it was, I know now, the same impulse that led me to the chapel of the Lavi for masturbatory distraction and temporary connection and relief. God help the trainee perverts of today as they stand Kleenex in hand on the brink of a Niagara of every conceivable kink. Accessible with any smart device they can cram into their clammy palms. Porn is a clear example of how our culture is feeding the disease of addiction. The natural impulse to have sex becomes a compulsion to masturbate. The attraction to connect is culturally translated by pornography into a numb and lonely staring strum at broken digital ghosts. The most physically creative thing we have, reduced to a dumb shuffle that embarrasses a monkey. Of course, if you'd told me at 14 that we were a decade away from a porn paradise, I would have toppled back in Damascene spasms at the prospect and scoffed at any pious talk of it being corrosive. Because I had no code for life, no awareness that what I was doing was problematic. In fact, porn, such as it was then, hedge snatched, stained, and shared rags, was the solution I'd discovered to the problem of being me, and it was a strong medicine. I'm writing this on a laptop, and I'm 41 years old, and the temptation to look at porn is still there. So how am I, in this moment, the moment which all enlightened folk agree is the only moment we actually have, going to avoid looking at porn? Here's the process. I recognize that I've looked at porn before, and I know what the results were then. It was distracting and numbing, which is good, but it didn't provide any real comfort. If I'm honest, it felt a bit worse. The 12 steps, along with the support of others who understand how I think and feel, whether it's the trivial urge to use porn or suicidal thoughts, are the only method I know of for disrupting detrimental habits. As a side note, it's worth mentioning that it is not a moral argument. For example, if you love looking at porn and don't have a problem with it, then I have no opinion on that or advice to offer. In fact, if you're happy with your wanking or boozing or drug use or self-esteem or relationships or eating, you probably don't need this book. If there's not a problem, there's not a problem, as they say in the 12-step organizations. For me, today on this planet, I thankfully aspire to more than brief interludes of numbness through food, sex, and the acquisition of delightful tight trousers with unpronounceable names. Particularly, as I now know they're all ciphers, poor facsimiles of the thing I'm actually seeking. I know then that looking at porn won't make me feel any better, that to look at porn even though I have this knowledge would be a pointless retread of a well-worn path. But as with heroin, chocolate bars, or relationships with inappropriate partners, knowing it won't work has not stopped me indulging. As if I have a negative faith in a self-destructive doctrine, that life cannot be better than it is now, that I don't deserve better, that I am worthless and dirty, so who cares what I do to cope? Once I topple, go active, decide to pursue my nominated object of addiction, I inwardly switch to a circuit of behavior that is distinct from my better nature. The Jekyll and Hyde story is an opposite allegory, and most addicts identify with the radical transition that occurs once they're triggered. There's no point, you, in this instance, in the role of Victorian flower girl, pleading with Mr. Hyde not to ravage you and kick over your begonias, telling him that he will regret it in the morning because Mr. Hyde doesn't give a F on a stick. Far safer to ask Dr. Jekyll to stop messing around with alchemy when he's clearly dangerously unqualified. Before he's taken that first drink, I don't know what he got his doctorate in. I bet it's one of those ones where the university just gave him a mortarboard and cape for turning up and giving a lecture. Once I go, I've gone. There have been many instances in my life where in the midst of some self-generated chaos, I have been granted the benefit of hindsight whilst the event is still unfolding. That often takes the form of a mental bird's-eye view. I seem to float up out of me, a yard or two above the carnage I've created, and look down at other me, thinking, oh look, there I am. I'm actually persevering with this mayhem. It's almost certainly a terrible idea. Oh well, too late now. I might as well jump back in with him and finish this shit off. This is not diminished responsibility. I am responsible for all the things I've done. It's just I wasn't this me while I was doing them. My life is about preserving the conditions where it is less likely that I will quantum leap into the other guy. To overcome that troubling and cyclical mentality, I had to believe that my life could be better. Whether that's better than a life as a drug addict 14 years ago or better now today by not looking at pornography. The consequences of my addiction were more palpable and severe when I was using drugs. The pace of deterioration, too, was in retrospect worrying. Most days were tarnished with a volatile emotional episode, physical injury, conflict, arrest, humiliation, or violence. I was very fortunate and will remain forever grateful that people intervened in my enthusiastic rush to the gutter. In this book, you will read much that might make you think I'm not as bad as him, or he's still a nutter. But the transformation I have experienced as the result of these steps is the important thing and is cause for great hope in anyone suffering from addiction. This idea of hope we shall explore in the next chapter. For now, let's summarize what we've discussed. So I'm not going to go through the summary. There is a bit more here to read. If you want to get that, I'm going to go ahead and include a link to Russell Brand's website where you can purchase a copy for yourself. There's also a workbook that goes along with this that's incredibly helpful to try and work the steps. What I am going to do briefly is talk about step 1. So he's using more his addiction to pornography than an expression of what really happened to him when he was out there using and trying to kill himself with heroin and alcohol and crack. He was in really bad shape, if anybody knows his story, much as a lot of other addicts who are suffering right now. The reason I'm including this information on my channel is because I also, just like Russell Brand, and a lot of people who won't admit how deep they've been into their poison of choice, have suffered from addiction at my own hands, at the hands of other people, because I didn't have illumination at that moment to sort of understand what was going on, the driving factors behind it. Okay, so number one, step one, is about the admission that I'm powerless over my addiction. What they're saying is not that you are not powerful, it's that you're misusing your power. And instead of aligning with spirit, you're trying to kill spirit. You don't believe you're worthy. You don't believe that your choices matter, which I assure you they do. Every choice, even if it's something like what he's saying, which seems sort of innocuous to some people to have like a porn addiction. He's saying it started with like eating chocolate and it graduated, and what he was doing was the same in every instance. It just was one substance replacing another, or one behavior replacing another. And he has an incredibly addictive personality. So a lot of people will like say, yeah, he's just a nut or whatever, and they won't admit to it because in their own ego validation, they want to feel like, well, at least I'm not as bad as that guy. See, I really don't have to take control of my situation. I don't have to admit that I'm powerless over my addiction. I don't have to admit that my life becomes unmanageable because I'm so addicted to this sort of, scientifically speaking, what's going on here that was cohesive from one substance or behavior to the next was, it was a chemical storm in the brain where he was getting the sense of gratification out of whatever it was he was choosing, right? I I see, even in my own ego sense, I resist sort of divulging the deeper parts of what I've gone through and how I can relate to what he's talking about too. So when I was younger, because I had a sense that my worth was based on what another person made me feel, I was very addicted to relationships. This is like really ubiquitous. A lot of people are like this. Hardly anybody really feels like they're super stoked just being alone and not being in a relationship. When you get older, through trial and error, a lot of people do have that feeling. But when you're younger, you seek validation through trying to couple up with another person and create, the standard family dynamic. Pretty much most people do that, right? So, yeah, when I was younger, definitely felt like I needed to have a boyfriend so that I felt like I was a worthwhile person. And there was a lot of abuse involved in those situations, mental, sometimes physical. And because I had no sense of my own self worth, I just stayed in it, But it was an addiction. I was addicted to that person validating me. I was addicted to, even in some of those situations, I too had substance problems, which is, see, again, it's like, how much do I out myself? I am healed from that now, thanks to my higher power, but only because in that place of humility, I learned who I am and what I came for. And I was trying to kill that for a lot of years. I did not respect who I was. And so I couldn't respect other people either. And so I was just perpetuating darkness between myself and other people. And it really came down to understanding how unique the experience of life is. Not me as an ego validated person saying, I'm so special, look at me because I'm different. And no, we are all created with this beauty within us. But the ego will just have you chasing, every waterfall and every substance and every person that it can get you to subscribe to as the answer to your problems. And that's what he was doing too. He had a lot of sexual addiction problems because he was trying to validate himself. He didn't feel like a worthwhile person. And so when he got deep into like porn, it was because he realized that he was using other people. This is my take on the situation. Essentially, it was more trouble than it was worth for him to keep chasing down women and being a misogynist essentially. But then what he really wanted, he's using the porn to try and accomplish the same end. He wasn't getting it from womanizing, he wasn't getting it from porn, and eventually had to come to a point where he realized, what I want is that human connection where I'm using this most powerful force of creation to solidify a beautiful bond with another person. He couldn't get there because he didn't see himself as being lovable in that way. And I think this is really a humongous problem in many, many developed countries in the world. Less so for different reasons that I won't get into in sort of lesser developed countries in the world. But it's still an issue. It's still an issue because it comes down to self-worth, and that's a very universal problem. People suffer with it their whole lives. And it starts in childhood. So, yeah, I think that, if you are really honest and you realize that even something as seemingly harmless as shopping, I've had that problem too. You get that chemical high sort of from going and you get this new thing and it feels really good because you're, excuse me, because you get sort of this renewed sense of like, it's like it pumps up your ego a little bit. Like, I got this really beautiful thing now, right? Oh my goodness, I have a tickle in my throat. Yeah, so I think it's really interesting though that he was so sort of bent on not doing it because of his resistance to the word God, which is, again, a really ubiquitous problem with people who suffer from addiction. Hold on one moment. Hold that thought. All right. But I think it's really important what he said here, referring to Eckhart Tolle too, who he has other videos on YouTube with, and who has also been a really important spiritual teacher for me personally. He's another teacher that he doesn't say he's teaching directly from A Course in Miracles usually, but he does refer to it. Sorry about that, guys. I think that it's really important to realize that the whole cycle begins with pain and it ends with pain. So it's like this horrible downward spiral problem that we try to numb it out by saying this substance will fix it for a short period of time. I don't have to think about it, but it just always keeps resurfacing. So it's like, it's about going to the deep places in your spirit and healing your heart, essentially. He doesn't use it like that. He's very cheeky about how he explains it. Like I said, it's a funner way to approach a 12-step program, essentially, because it can be a really serious process, and it is a really serious process. It's like it's your life work to heal your own spirit, you know. But whatever your poison is, the vices aren't so much the problem, aren't so much the focus here as what is causing this thing to occur, because that's where you head it off at the pass. The thing will just keep resurfacing, and you'll go from one thing to the next, trying to figure out how to ease the pain because you're having a hard time looking at it and facing it head on. And so it will spin out of control because it'll just go from one thing to the next. Usually, your consequences are basically like broken relationships, financial hardship, and sort of that perpetual self-loathing that just keeps coming back around. It's an unfortunate thing, but essentially, if you're willing to humble yourself and say, I'm tired of doing the same cycle over and over and over, and I want to know how to heal that hurt so that I can move forward and have those meaningful experiences that I'm really trying to get to, but that seem so elusive to me. What is preventing me from getting there? Is it my self, my inner dialogue, the way that I talk to myself, the way that I treat myself, the way that I don't value myself? Usually comes down to those things. So I encourage you to get a copy of this book and the workbook and join me here. Even if you don't comment, like, I totally understand. All of the 12-step programs out there are about anonymity. Okay? It's about humble yourself before your higher power. You don't have to do that in front of everybody else or anybody else. At some point in the program, you do need to be able to admit to someone besides yourself so that you have a real honest inventory of exactly where you were going wrong. It helps you stay accountable so that you stay on the right path. I really want people to share this out because I know how incredibly damaging addiction can be. I've had to lose people. I've had to see people almost die from addiction. It doesn't need to happen. This is how you be your brother's keeper. You pull each other in, you illuminate for each other, you hold that sacred space. And even if you don't want to talk to somebody, but you know they're suffering with an addiction, just simply send it to them. You don't even have to say a word to them. And there's a lot of other resources online. All those things, I'm going to put links in the description box because, we really need to be there for each other. The reason that addiction gets so out of control is because we see it and we let it go because we feel like it's not ours or it's out of our hands. What you do today matters, okay? Addicted or not, especially if you are recovered. If you've been in recovery, if you're, still fighting it, we need to pull each other into the boat. There's a lot of people drowning in the confusion. This is what we do for each other on this planet as brothers and sisters. You see a brother drowning, you see a sister drowning, you pull them in the boat, help each other out. Don't just watch somebody and do nothing. I've seen it happen too many times. And needlessly, people losing their life, losing their sanity, damaging the lives of other people. And it doesn't need to continue. We're at a point where we're beyond that now. Okay? There's too many things that we have access to and no excuse for us not to help each other out. So, find someone and try and be there for them in whatever safe way you can, even if that's only just like send them a link to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or Codependence Anonymous, or even if somebody's hurting and they're not the one who's in active addiction, there's like Al-Anon. There's so many ways that we can do a very small, simple gesture that can mean all the difference to somebody if they receive that information and that hand out to pull them up in that one particular moment of need. You just don't know how bad some people are suffering and how much they don't want to be a victim to their own circumstances, their own addictions, but they don't know how to get out of it. So I thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it so much for your time. Like, share, comment, subscribe. There's no pressure on that. It is a program that's based on anonymity. But if you don't want to comment and you know somebody's suffering, share the video out. Help people to find a path forward, to know they're not alone. That's the most important thing. Again, thank you for your interest. Thank you for your time. Join us next time here on the Miraculous Lightworkers channel as we all come together to uplift, enlighten, and ascend. Bye now.